Welcome back to the story of my parents, Smitty and Joann. In the last video, part 5, I told you about my mom's dad, Joe Poole, the grandfather I'm named for. I never knew him. This video will be about his wife, my grandmother, Hazel Luana Hawkins Poole. I knew her quite well. Imagine having a grandmother who didn't like you, and letting you know she didn't like you every single day. What grandmother doesn't like her grandkids? Don't let the big grin on my face fool you. She probably dropped me on my head after this picture was taken. I should have gotten therapy, I suppose, but asking my mom about it when I got older was a lot cheaper than hiring a therapist. My mother was very aware of my grandmother's feelings towards me because her grandmother didn't like her either. But according to my mother, this was all Uncle Lewis's fault. I'm deadly serious. My mother blamed her mother's brother-in-law for my lifetime of misery.
There were times I would like to have run his neck because he loved to tease Mother, and you know you couldn't tease Mother. She took everything literally. And that's how you got in trouble with Mother, because they said to her, "Don't you know Joni loves that blood child of hers a lot more than she loves that adopted daughter?" Now this is something they said in jest. I talked to him later about it. I said, you ruined my life. I said, you knew how Mother was. Yeah, but she's a lot of fun to tease. But she doesn't take it as teasing. She takes it literally. So she was always on to you. Always. Because I loved you more than I loved. And where did it come from? It came from Uncle Lewis.
Good old Uncle Lewis. I never knew him either. Grandma came from the Hawkins and Estateson. Mom seemed to know a lot about them.
I know all about the Hawkins family. They came over in about 1652. They settled in North Carolina. My grandmother is the only grandparent I knew, was a Estateson from Georgia, Augusta, Georgia. She was born in 1859. Her father's brother had moved to Dakota Territory, and he says, "Come on up here." So they went up and they spent one winter, and then they came back, trying to get water out of a frozen stream a mile away was more than they wanted to chew. So part of the Estateson family moved to Missouri and then on down to New Mexico, to Albuquerque, Chattanooga, Tennessee, the Statesons. I know that much about him. And whereas he'd been a farmer, he became a cabinet maker, furniture maker, made furniture. They had 2 girls and 3 boys in that family, 3 or 4 boys. There was Aunt Fanny and then my grandmother, Jane Irene Roselle Statson. I knew her. I did not know any of Aunt Fanny. She married a Chumley. As a matter of fact, some of the Chumleys became rather well known in the literary field.
Jane Irene Roselle Statson. What a name. She married a Hawkins, and together they had 9 kids. One of them, Hazel, my grandmother, was born in 1896. Mr. Hawkins developed tuberculosis and went to New Mexico, since that's what they did back then for TB. They left the kids behind in Tennessee, including my grandmother. Mr. Hawkins died, unfortunately, so my great-grandmother went back to Tennessee, grabbed a few of her kids, and moved to Alabama to be closer to family.
She moved to Birmingham where her brothers lived, and she got a home, and she ran a boarding house. That's when young men used to come to town and live, you know, and they lived in boarding houses. My father decided when he married Mother that my grandmother should no longer have to work and live alone. Mother played bridge and she ran the house. She was a Methodist. She read the book of Revelation religiously, and she was a Republican.
A Republican in the South in the late 1800s. Very interesting. So Mom grew up living with a grandmother who didn't care for her either. Maybe Mom and I could have gotten therapy together.
My grandmother didn't like me, and I was the one with her when she died. And she knew I was there with her. My mother wouldn't even go in the room. She knew her mother was dying. But boy, she called me the queen. She says, the queen gets away with everything, doesn't she? But my grandmother was one that wielded axes for temperance and marched for women's suffrage. But she also helped my father bottle beer down in the basement. When grandmother died and I called Aunt Gray, she says, well, the old lady finally left, huh? So it was left up to me to decide where she should be buried. And I didn't have the money to send her to Chattanooga. So I said, okay, she'll be buried in my mother's spot. Nobody objected to it then, but I lived to regret it because everybody jumped on me afterwards. So she's buried next to my father, but she adored my father, and my father was very, very good to her.
Grandma probably could have used a little therapy herself since she was one of 9 kids.
She had 4 brothers and 3 sisters. And the last child, Stacy, was a little boy, but he died when he was a few months old. So mother was the next to the youngest. The oldest was Aunt Min, supposedly a great beauty. Well, they were known as the beautiful Hawkins girls. They were all small. Mother was the tallest, but the rest of them were around 5 feet tall or under. My grandmother was under 5 feet. Let's see, there was Elmer and Grover. Grover burned in a hotel fire in Houston. Grover was a nice brother. Bertram and Elmer were the 2 that got in trouble all the time. Willard. He was the one that was gassed during World War I and was never really quite right again. He married a nice woman who had lost her husband during the war and had one child. And she really took good care of him. His mother kept up with them always. And I have a picture of the wife and the child.
Min, Myrtle, Hazel, Gray, Elmer, Grover, Bertram, and Willard. But in every family, there's always a little scandal. Remember what my mother said about Bertram and Elmer always getting into trouble?
But the 2 boys got themselves in a lot of trouble. Uncle Antone was an accountant for a company. And in order to get them out of jail, he embezzled some money from the company. They fired him, but they didn't have him put in jail. And they didn't demand the money back. But they had to leave. That's when they moved out. They first moved out to Lordsburg, New Mexico. And then they moved finally to Houston. And of course, Aunt Min wanted her brothers out of jail. And Uncle Antone was not the type to embezzle money, but he did.
But Mom did tell me a few things about Grandma when she was young that I didn't know. Seems that Mom didn't know it either until she was older. Like Grandma dropping out of high school to work in the family boarding house.
Mother, left high school to go to work so her sister Gray could finish high school. That's something I didn't know until much later. And no one ever appreciated her for that. But that's what she did. And not only that, the first job she was 14. And she had a man that owned the store that she worked in. Was going to have what he wanted. And she had to quit that job. Well, imagine a little 14-year-old girl. She learned how to type. And so she got a job as a typist or a file clerk or something in one of the big companies there. And they just took her under their wing. And so she got to know all kinds of people that way. They just loved her. So that was the best thing that ever happened to her.
Well, there you have it. Hazel Luana Hawkins Poole, my grandmother. My friends loved you, Grandma. I probably did too in my own way. Next time we'll talk about some of my dad's family. I got along with them great.